the state's principal mechanisms for stimulating the construction of affordable housing. In 2017, the California debt limit allocation for tax-exempt bonds helped to finance more than 12,000 units of housing, including more than 10,000 affordable units, and assisted over 2,000 new home buyers. Fiona was elected treasurer in November of 2018, and before that, though, she served 4 years on the State Board of Equalization, serving one of those years as the chair of the State Board of Equalization. She's also a CPA, one of only two, I think, that served on the Board of Equalization. Before that, she was in the State Assembly from 2006 to 2012, and she was the first Asian American woman to become Speaker Pro Tem of the State Assembly. And before that, she was in local government and served on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco from 2002 to 2006. I also want to give a shout out to one of our experts in affordable housing, and that's Dave Rutledge. Without Dave's assistance, and I'm going to read to you, he's many things, and I'm going to read to you a letter that the executive director of California Tax Credit Allocation Committee wrote in December of 2017 after they made the Tax Credit Allocation Committee made an important decision. This is written to Dave Muir, and it's from Mark Stivers. I just want to let you know that the Tax Credit Allocation Committee yesterday approved various regulation changes, including one to remove Butte and Shasta counties from the capital region and place them in a new northern region along with Napa, Marin, Sonoma, and Solano counties. This new region has no local government that dominates the competition, which should improve the competitiveness of each of these counties. Dave Rutledge was in strong support, and we appreciate his help. So I want to give a shout out to Dave Rutledge. And with that, I'll pass the mic on to our next speaker, and I want to welcome Treasurer Ma.
Thank you, Kristen. So thank you very much. We are hitting 6 months on the job. And like Kristen said, I started out as an aide to John Burton, field representative, and then served at the local level where I'm used to being in the community, and the community is used to seeing their elected officials. And it seems as you move further and further up, that interaction happens less. But I believe interactions are better. So we have a strong policy of taking everything we do out to the road. So this is our 7th out of 10 listening tours that we have done over the last 2 weeks. We will be in Sacramento this afternoon, Fresno tomorrow, and then San Jose will be the last one tomorrow afternoon. And what we're really trying to do is, number one, come and assess what your needs are in your community. The city and the states and the counties are all very different. And sometimes we have a tendency in government to lump everybody together and have everybody compete in the same manner when it just doesn't work for certain communities. So we're here to listen to what your needs are. And then on the second purpose is really to go through some of the ideas that we have received to reform our CDLAC and TCAC regulations. Don't panic. For those of the developers here in the room, we are not changing the rules right now. This would be a phase-in period, but we really want to plan for the next 8, 10, 20 years. Communities have changed since the last time we have done regulations some 15 years ago. And so we want to figure out where communities are, where they are living, where they want to age in place, for example. And so this is really a discussion for you and for us to listen. So as your state treasurer, I am your state banker. Over $2 trillion goes through my office every year. I manage $109 billion in short-term investments and about $90 billion in bonds. So that's my geeky CPA finance hat. My parents are proud of me that I'm not wasting my education and experience. And then on the other side, I also chair 16 boards and commissions. So 2 are here, CDLAC and TCAC. I also finance schools, hospitals, technology, green technology investments, as well as a whole host of small business loans, whether it's for operations, electric vehicles, um, fleet, transforming diesel trucks to cleaner vehicles, seismic safety, ADA access. So I have a lot of different programs under my purview. And so I am in the unique place to say, if you need money, if you need grants, loans, or bonds, please come and see me, and I will see what I can do. And since I have some of our building trades brothers and sisters here in the room, I did issue 9 bonds this spring, about $6.8 billion. That is going to go to many infrastructure projects. So, yes. And we thank Jerry Brown for his what is it? What do I call it? His focus on balancing our budget, making sure we have a healthy surplus and a rainy day fund. But now we have to make sure that we get back to, investing in our communities and the things that everybody has been waiting for to build or to retrofit. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my deputy over Housing and Economic Development, Jovan Agee. He has been doing a great job moving around the state, also meeting with constituents, trying to figure out who is shovel ready and who wants housing, because we are really trying to leverage our resources so that we are not, just doing one-offs all over the state, but to really figure out which communities have a plan, they've come together, they want to see things done, and that's kind of our motive and goal, is to help Gavin Newsom get to that $3.5 million home by 2025. So Jovan's been doing a great job for me. I thank Jovan.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. It was funny when I was driving last night from Sacramento, headed north to go to Reading. It felt like it was further away than it had ever been in my life. I'm like, when am I getting to Reading? And so I don't know if the state is growing or if the city's just getting bigger. But nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be here. Oftentimes, having been from the Central Valley, I know what it's like to be in a place oftentimes that politicians and other principals in the state forget about. And so, we wanted to make a point after our January tour to hit cities throughout the state that oftentimes gets overlooked, but nonetheless are equally as important to the health of this state, and Reading is one of those cities. And so with that, as the treasurer mentioned, the governor introduced a housing goal of 3.5 million housing units by 2025 in January when he released the state budget. We anticipate that he will sign a state budget today. Today's the deadline from which he received the draft budget from the state legislature. But in it, his goal is very aggressive. Just to put it in context, 3.5 million housing units by 2025 equates to about 500,000 houses a year being produced. We currently produce about 80,000. So that's more than quadrupling our housing stock. And so when we talk about our regulations and we talk about how do we incentivize the private sector to do more development, we also need to be equally thinking about the role of labor and how do we train people so that the people that are needed to actually develop the projects are there as well. Because if we do one without the other, we still won't reach our goal. And so to frame the conversation that we're about to have today, I'm going to allow for Anthony Zito, who is our most principled staff at TCAC, introduce himself, talk a little bit about what TCAC does. I'll then let Evan Cass do the same thing, who is the most principled staff at CDLAC. Then we'll go back to Anthony to walk us through the PowerPoint slide. At any point during the slide, if you have a question or a comment, please submit a card. Please weigh in. Again, we do not want this to be a one-way conversation. We want this to be a discussion. And this is the beginning of a discussion that will take place over the next 5 months. So once that happens, I'll give a quick grounding on our goals. Then we'll talk about next steps in terms of what you can expect post today. And so with that, Anthony, do you want to introduce yourself and give a brief overview?
Hi, I'm Anthony Zito, Deputy Director at TCAC. I'm not sure how many of you guys know me. So TCAC is the administrator of the low-income housing tax credits, both federal and state, for the state of California. Developers apply for tax credits through TCAC, and if awarded, they move on and construct the projects, selling the credits to investors and forming a limited partnership. And once the project's built, the tax forms are issued, and our compliance team goes out and monitors the projects for affordability throughout the 55-year term of the project. So that's pretty much TCAC. We work with CDLAC very closely on a portion of the projects, which involves the tax-exempt bonds, and I'll segue that to Evan to talk about that.
Yeah, for the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, we issue tax-exempt private activity bonds. That comes out of a debt ceiling, which we set at the beginning of the year using a prescribed IRS per capita formula. So there is a limit to how much allocation we can give for bonds for affordable housing. So far, we have been not hitting that limit and being able to carry forward money for more projects. But we're getting closer to reaching that limit going forward. So this is a crucial time to look at our regs.
So if we can go to our goal slide. So what you'll see is, in addition to the housing priority that was set by the governor and is now being championed by the treasurer, you will see 6 goals that really sort of govern the work that we do in our housing and economic development aspect of the treasurer's office. And so the 6 goals you have before you are accompanied by icons. The icons were established to sort of make this PowerPoint as visually appealing as possible. We're going to try not to make this conversation wonky. It's going to be very hard to do so. This is very technical stuff. But what you'll see above each slide is a highlighted or grayed out icon. What that represents is that proposed suggestion meets one of the 6 goals that we're trying to advance. And so on some slides, you'll see just one icon highlighted. In other slides, you'll see as many as 3 or 4 icons highlighted. And so just to quickly go through the goals, and I like to spend a little bit of time on this because oftentimes you'll have elected officials, irrespective of party affiliation, that will say a whole lot of things. But you don't truly know who they are. And so oftentimes you have to watch their votes. You have to actually watch their actions. But I also say, what are their goals? Because their goals are essentially who they are. It's their value statement. And so for Fiona Ma, what she's outlined is for the housing and economic development goals in California is 1, increasing housing production, which we all agree needs to happen. 2nd, look at how do we contain development costs. And we want to be very strategic in doing that. It's not just the overt costs that we often hear about, whether it's wages and benefits, other construction costs, sites, but also some of the hidden costs that we don't talk about and spend enough time dealing with, like permitting and entitlement and how those things impact projects. Spurring new technology is the 3rd. Increasing opportunity for women and people of color in the development and investment space. Empowering individuals in distressed communities to be a part of the development happening in their communities. And then lastly, building wealth for all Californians. As a state's banker, it's extremely important for the treasurer to make sure that all the incentives that we have, people know about them. And irrespective of what community they live in, everyone should have the opportunity at the American dream. And so that is a goal of hers as well. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to go into our first slide. And then again, we'll open the floor for questions or comments on that initial component of the dialogue.
All right, so as Jovan mentioned, I'm going to go through the regulation changes that were suggested to us. So these do not necessarily reflect changes that are ultimately going to be proposed, but they are just to start the conversation. And again, these are suggestions that were presented to us. The first one has to do with 4% projects, leveraging conventional debt. One of the suggested changes was we currently have a requirement to restrict 10% of the units at 50% of area median income. And that's a requirement for both TCAC and CDLAC, and that's just a minimum. But we've been a change that has been suggested to us to remove that requirement, and it's mainly we were told that some projects are infeasible, and by removing this requirement, a project could take in more rental income and ultimately support more debt. Okay, so that's the main purpose of that. And then, on the downside, we would lose affordability on those units. So, as with every change, there's pros and cons. And then the other change has to do with average income projects. So if a project has to maintain, if they're doing the average income test, they have to maintain a 59% average of area median income, 59%. And the suggested change was to remove that, which would essentially put it at 60%. So it sounds like it's only 1% difference, but again, same reasoning behind the purpose of that. The next few changes have to do with the tiebreaker. Our projects in the competitive system, which we call are primarily the 9% projects, most of the projects that get awarded are full points projects. So they receive the full points that we have. And a lot of the times it comes down to the tiebreaker, okay? So the next few changes are changes that would affect the immediate tiebreaker. So the current tiebreaker, just a couple of tweaks that we could make to help and increase units, which is one of the goals of the treasurer. So the existing tiebreaker right now, focuses on soft money and public funds in a project. So if you maximize that, that helps your tiebreaker. In addition, if you're requesting less credits, that also helps your tiebreaker. So some immediate fixes that were recommended to us would be to apply a multiplier to amplify, so size, right? So if you were to increase the number of units, you could get a boost on that first ratio, okay? So that would promote projects to want to build bigger projects, right? Because they would more likely have a better tiebreaker score. So that's one of them. And we currently have a size factor built into the tiebreaker, but this would further amplify that. The next two changes have to do with the second ratio, which deals with requesting less credit. One of them, we currently divide that ratio by 3, and that was mainly because we thought that the second ratio originally was affecting the overall score probably more than it should. So we divided it by 3. But now it was just suggested that maybe it was too much, it was cutting the effect too much. So the suggested change would be to divide it by 2. So that would help that second ratio mean a little bit more in the whole calculation of the tiebreaker score. And that again would incentivize projects to request less credit. Okay, and then that would in turn spread out the credit among more projects. And then the other one has to do with state credits. It's mainly to kind of quantify the state credit effect. Projects that request federal credits only, they are kind of, they can essentially, they're at a disadvantage from projects requesting federal and state, because projects requesting federal and state can reduce their basis down and ultimately get state credits to compensate for any federal credits they're not getting, okay? And so this would kind of put those more at a level playing field between those two type of projects. Okay, so that's the existing tiebreaker, and those are the changes that are recommended to us. The next few changes have to do with a complete redesign of the tiebreaker into just a brand new tiebreaker, focusing on units. So the tiebreaker would be a ratio of units produced divided by credits requested. So again, it's a lot of the same goals. You want to promote units, and you want to spread the credits out. So that would be the fundamental equation. And then on top of that, we would add multipliers to incentivize whatever we are viewing as what we want to use as for the best public benefit. And again, that would be a conversation with everybody here and throughout the state on what those factors are. Okay. And then one other factor to be considered is cost compared to state averages. So we would add or subtract depending on how the current project fares with the state averages as it relates to costs. So you obviously, if it's lower than the state averages, then your score would benefit, and if it's more, then your score would go down. So that's our way of taking account costs. And I can go into detail on those changes that kind of were presented as public benefit ones, but I don't know if you want to turn to the speakers first.
Okay, so we have a whole PowerPoint, and we can go through the whole PowerPoint if you'd like. It is on our website. There should be some copies, but I want to just intersperse with speakers. And so since Dave was mentioned by Kristen, I'm going to start with Dave. You want to come up here?
First, from my perspective, thank you very much. This is a great effort being made by all of you, and it's really appreciated. And I, for the first time, feel like we're making some really good strides. You listen, you care. Overall, I've been involved with tax credit projects since 1998. And I served for a while as a county representative on the tax credit committee, and I've met the staff. I'd have to say, from our perspective, for being involved in about 100 projects across California, that the regulations themselves, I think changing them and making them a little less ambiguous and some clarity would make it the world easier for the development community, but also for the staff. Because we get in this environment where there are appeals and it eats people up on both sides, and I look at the staff and they get beat up and everybody is frustrated. So the better job we can do of that, I think in the end we'll get the result we want. But two, we do have some very lofty goals, and we want to create many more housing units. I've had discussions with some of the biggest developers in the state. We think that it's possible to increase production from the 9% program by about 1,000 units. The heavy lifting is always on the 4% side. It's where the majority of the housing units are produced. We need to take a good hard look at what we're doing. There were some changes in that program made in the last couple of years that increased production. So we're heading in the right direction, but to get where we need to go, we need to further look at where we're going. From our part of the world, and if you look at where you are and a lot of the areas we serve, we're on the low end of the median income scale in California. Shasta County is right at the bottom with a lot of the other rural counties, and it's the same from here to Bakersfield. Almost all the median incomes fall into that same bracket. Family of four, $64,800. And when we try to pencil out projects, when you're dealing with those incomes and you back it out, it's really, really hard to figure out how to make things work. So that's one reason I backed the proposals, changing some of those medians. We need to get, if we're going to serve people at the lower end, we need to get some people at the higher end picking up the cost of operating these projects, because when Anthony, we're now at, what's our annual cost to run a project's what, $4,200, $4,300? Yeah, but we're $4,000 something annually to operate a single unit in a project. So if you take your income, particularly when you're down at the 30%, the 30% minus that cost doesn't leave any money. And we're involved in a ton of projects that right now are at or are negative cash flowing. And that is not good. And I mean, this morning, I just signed paperwork for a project up at South Lake Tahoe. We're trying to refinance it with our partner up there to get it to the point it doesn't run at such a negative. So that's another issue we face. So I hope, and I have some written comments. I don't want to go through them, but I'll leave them for you. And they're just, they back a lot of the others, but I'd like to have you take a look, because I know the feedback you get, because when I go to meetings, the folks from the Bay Area, for the most part, the world is fine with them. They don't want any changes. But I'll tell you, on the other side, I've watched developers try to go do business in the Bay Area, and if you're not from there, they don't want you. And we have to look at that as one set. The folks in Los Angeles get their own allocation. I know LAHCID, and they do their thing, and they go through their RFP process. So the rules that are set for the tax credit program when you get to those two big cities basically don't make much difference, because they're making their own recommendations anyway. So the rest of us out here in the woods, we need to have some changes. We need to really address costs, because we just had 2 projects make it, and both of them, total project cost for one in Reading, another one up in Truckee, $424,000 a unit. And when you look at what it costs to house people and what our median sales price right now for a single family residence in Reading is about $265,000. So we're paying substantially more than that to build an apartment unit. When I talk to people in the community, they look at me and they go, how in the heck does that happen? So we need to ask that question. But anyway, thank you both, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Dave. And we agree, and we have been going around the state, and you're right, some people like the way it is, some people don't, and we are telling everybody that in order to meet these goals, we need to all compromise. So standing in a corner and just staring at each other is not going to work anymore. And to figure out what we can do in this crisis, everybody is going to have to give a little. And cities and counties that really want housing need to let us know. We are also following jobs, where jobs are coming in a community. So if a new hospital or a new distribution site is coming, yet there's no living, well, that's just going to exacerbate the situation. So, please let us know, because we are trying to be more deliberate about where we build housing versus just whoever can win the 9% tiebreaker because, they're able to get soft money. I mean, that to us is not going to work anymore. So just rest assured, but it does create a little issues with folks. You also talked about the appeals process. We are trying to resolve as many appeals as we can, as quickly as we can, so that, project developers know whether a project is going to go through or not, right? And my whole team is really trying to work with the community, not dinging them because they didn't check a box or didn't include a form, but to really, be deliberate to look at the project, who the sponsors are, who's, where it is in a community, and really try to make it happen. A suggestion was also to roll the 4% applications. Why were we just hearing them every quarter? So we are rolling as applications are ready. And then the latest problem that came on our desk is the 8609 forms. I guess there's a backlog. So we are trying to figure out how to work with the private sector to get the private sector to help with some of those more complicated applications, so that when they come in, at least our staff isn't, scratching their heads, or if we don't have experienced staff, then it just sits on someone's desk. And so that's not helpful. But as you're coming across problems or issues that, we can help with, please let us know. And we are trying to streamline our processes with HCD and CalHFA. It doesn't make sense to have 3 different applications, 3 different compliance, checklists. We're trying to figure out how we can have one where we can all use it, and then also on the compliance one where we can all use that.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think more generally, you're speaking to a lot of things that really are at the heart of the problem. And the start is building affordable housing is not as attractive as building market rate housing. and we have to do something about that. Until we make it just as attractive for a developer to embark upon building affordable housing as it is to building market rate housing, nothing will change. Because at the end of the day, people will pick and choose the type of work that they take on. And so as government, we have to incentivize behavior. And so we are looking to do that. Additionally, it impacts labor. Folks that work on market rate projects make more than folks that work on affordable housing projects. And so we believe that by changing that at the top or at the beginning with the developer, then the impact will be seen sort of with every piece of the component that needs to get done. And so that's something that we're looking at as well. Additionally, really, I think you didn't say it, but I'll say it this way. It's really looking at parity and equity amongst regions. And so it's interesting because while a rural community geographically may be different than an urban area, there are economies within urban areas that mirror rural communities. So when you go into places like South Los Angeles, North Sacramento, Southeast Bakersfield, in some of those communities, it's just as difficult because of the depressed market as it is in rural communities. And we don't always do a good job of seeing those nuances in those specifics within regions. And so that's something we're going to look at as well and really figure out how do we reconcile that.
Catherine Sherwood.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Also, one of the things that you were talking about, maybe there could be an incentive for contractors to give them an incentive of something that would help them want to give back to the community in that way. It's an idea. So I'm a manager of Treehouse Senior Apartments. It's a senior housing property. And I just kind of wanted to put a face on the people that actually rent the low housing, the affordable housing. And we have 61 senior residents. And affordable housing makes for great communities. And there we have some that were nurses, some that were farm workers, some that were they're all different types that they come from. Homemakers, waitresses. They didn't have really good retirement funds or even have retirement funds. So they're very, very thankful. We put together a packet for you, and I'll give it to you afterwards. But the residents put together a DVD that is for thanking everybody for affordable housing, because a lot of them are trying to make choices between paying their rent, putting food on the table, or paying their medical bills, and that's really, really hard for the seniors. And I know that one of our seniors has a pharmacy that bill is like $600 a month. How is she, going to pay her rent and her food with $600? That's just one medicine. So I just wanted to put a face to that. We do have seniors really need a lot of housing here. We have 50 on our wait list. We have between 50 and 80 at a time on our wait list, and so we need more senior housing.
Thank you, Catherine. I've been living with my parents for the past 15 years, and I understand. My mom had a small pension being a teacher at $16,000, and then $18,000 in Social Security. So that's what she's been living on, $34,000, since she was, in her, 50s. So it is really getting more and more difficult. So at the state level, we are working on a senior master care plan. I'm working with 4 different authors on trying to figure out how to address the needs of individuals as they get older. I think we do a pretty good job from prenatal to 65, but from 65 to 75 years old, 75 to 85, and then now 85 to 95 years old. That requires a whole different level of programs and services and even caregivers. Who is going to care, right, if we are trying to age in place? So we are very, very focused on that, and I'm glad the legislature and the governor also signed an executive order putting aging and in place as one of his priorities. Okay, Travis Brown.
Hi, I'm Travis Brown. I'm proud to representing the carpenters here today, the union. To incentivize, I've never said that word before, that was my first time. To give out incentives is good, but the incentives that are being given out, can't take from the workers. You know, they still deserve a living wage. You know, without a living wage, you know, they're not even going to be able to afford to buy a home. You know, so residential housing, the cost or what they make is 33% lower than non-residential housing. That's a lot of money. So they're getting paid 33% less. They're working just as hard when they deserve a living wage. You know, so I think that, you know, I think we need to incentivize with training. You said it perfect. I agree with you 100%. You know, if we get a skilled trade out there that is out there working and they go to classes and they get training, then they're going to be better, you know, and then they're going to get out to where they're earning middle class America. They're buying a home. I started out residential. I bought a home now once I got out, you know what I mean? And I bought a home. I put my son through college. He just graduated with his master's degree, you know, and a low wage, I would have never been able to afford to do that because not every child can get a scholarship, you know. So I think that that's something that we really need to look at. Maybe create a scoring system for employers or incentivize for training progress, you know. Let's give them incentives to train us, to train the workers, to train our kids that deserve to have a good life and get out of low-class America. So, thank you.
Kernigan is the last name. F. Kernigan. Okay. Well, it's just because it's attached to the.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Ed Kernahan, and I'm Vice President of JF Shea here in Reading, one of 7 division presidents for the company, and we are involved in private housing, Shea Homes, Shea Properties, and actually it's thanks to Chuck, the carpenters, that I'm here today. I had a visit with him. We're a union contractor, heavy civil contractor, and so I've somehow, which you may not even know, I'm part of a task force in the state of California. Mary Tykert asked me involved in this task force, and granted, and there's a separate task force right now made up of all the large material companies in the state, and we're trying to figure out how to help you attain your goals. And it is an interesting task. We've met with the CBIA, and so right now we're still at the proving grounds trying to figure out what we're doing. And thanks to Daniel Knott, I actually now understand a little bit about tax credit building because I had no clue, because anytime I try to put a pencil to anything, I'm a private, for-profit contractor. We're union, and we're actually one of the few union home builders in the state of California that has used union labor to construct some projects in the Bay Area. So thank you for your help. We think I'm also somewhat personally involved that I care. I have 2 hardworking daughters. One's chosen Orange County, and one's chosen downtown San Francisco. And they can barely rent a bedroom, and they're doing really well in life. So I just want to make a few points and tell you where I'm coming from this thing. I hope it didn't take you too long to get here when you hit Anderson, because that's our construction job, thanks to the state of California. And we've got a little bit of work going on down there for you, those of you who don't know that. But a couple of things I wanted to tell you about here is that when I tried to look at trying to develop some properties here in this area, I'm concerned about Tehama County, Shasta County, and Siskiyou County, and it is a definite struggle. And when you put any kind of a business number or ROI on the projects here in this community, it is almost impossible to make them work. That I can tell you. The tax credit side, I still don't get it, but Daniel will help me here still. We're working on this together. I'm going to try to help him. He does a great job around town here. I'm concerned also our employees here. My son can make a mortgage payment here and raise 2 kids with a wife, and he pays less for a mortgage than my daughter does for a studio in Orange County. Her choice where to live, but that's how tough it is. For a lot of the contractors that I deal with, most of these guys are all across the state, but the Bay Area people, their employees are traveling 2 to 3 hours one way to get to work, which is just insane from a risk standpoint or your employee standpoint. I don't like to think that the employees working for us can't afford to buy a home, put their kids through school if they want, have medical, have retirement. I think that's a big deal. This community, if you're doing what we do, we can afford it, we can do it, and it's great. It's really tough with where we're at right now today for the private builders in town here, and they work hard, they do a great job, build quality stuff. They're good builders, so it's not anything to do with that. Let's see. That's about it. But just so you know, we are trying to put together a group to try to meet with you folks and Governor Newsom and try to bring a perspective from our group to try to help what you're trying to do. And we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, so thank you, Ed. I mean, this is the purpose of actually coming out to the community, is because sometimes you put a meeting up on the agenda, nobody knows what it is, nobody shows up, and you get no feedback, and you think everything's going fine, which we know clearly is not. So, well, see, there you go. And I want to thank them. The Carpenters have been at every one of our hearings, and we're encouraging everyone just to come out and just let us know exactly what's happening. And when I was on the Board of Equalization, I represented 23 counties, all the way from the Oregon border down to Santa Barbara. So Shasta, Tehama, Glen, Colusa. I was out here a lot. But yes, it is difficult, not impossible. But again, if the community, gets together and says, hey, we're ready, we want to do this, what can you do to help us? That's our job. We figure that's our job, to try to leverage as many resources that we can, and also to create a system that encourages leveraging different pots of money instead of, just one or two. So I know Dave has been in the game a long time, and things have changed, right? Healthcare, it should be a part of it, right? Governor Newsom wants to have free preschool for every 4-year-old. Where are they going to go? We need to build preschools. I mean, there's just a lot of different pots of money where we can, combine it all and to build actually more holistic communities instead of the traditional just, one building with a couple units. Great. Thank you, Ed. All right. Where did I leave off? How about, am I done there? Francis?
Hi, I'm Frances Cole-Boyd. I've never done this before, but I think it's important. I'm the resident service coordinator at Mountain Vista Senior Apartments, and I'm following along with what Catherine said. We have 97 units, and to give a picture of our residents, probably the average that they make a month is $1,000 to maybe $1,200. Some only make $700 a month. These are people that are veterans. They worked in the lumber industry. They were carpenters, truck drivers, teachers, a fireman. We have one gal who had plenty of money, was married to a CHP officer, like the head of CHP, and they got a divorce. And she lost everything. She was living comfortably, and now, she's not. We have one gentleman who worked hard all his life, gives back to the community still. They had retirement. They would have been fine. But because of his wife and health issues in long term for about 10 years, they had to cash in his retirement. So these are the people that are there. And also I wanted to bring to your attention again and to everybody's, as their needs increase, we provide a little bit of supportive care, but we are independent living. In order to go to assisted living, it is at least $3,500 a month, at least. If they're only making $1,200 a month, they cannot do that. I see one of my friends from APS who, knows that very well, and I think that's just so important that we help, all of our vulnerable people, but as we are having more and more older adults as they have, our baby boomers have come out. So I'm here to advocate for our vulnerable older adults. Thank you.
Debbie Villasensart.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay. So I think I'm going to keep on the theme that was we talked about earlier about senior housing. And we know that's an up-and-coming big demographic that we're going to all need to try to prepare for. And I think I'd like to ask both the tax credit and in your partners, MHP, if you can go back and revisit the age change that you made from 55 years old or older to making the threshold 62 years or older. And I'd like you to revisit that situation. I especially am a housing consultant for both Butte County and Tehama County. And I represent the No Place Like Home program, and that's the permanent supportive housing for folks with serious mental illness who are homeless. And the housing is linked with services. And that program is encouraging us to integrate our units with other housing. And for our vulnerable population, I think that age of 62 is really high. And I'd like to see the age drop back down to 55 so we can open the window and serve more of our target population who are out in the street and who are vulnerable. And we could maybe add some security and some housing to them to stabilize and maybe help them reintegrate and thrive in our community earlier and maybe reduce some of that chronic health issue that happens with homelessness. But also we need to be able to partner with the other affordable housing providers in the area. And so we really do ask that you look at that age of seniors from 62 and drop it back down to 55. Talk to your partners, MHP program. And you know, it's hard enough to bring these units forward. I think we all are saying that to you. It takes a lot of work. And when we do bring units forward for our community members, let's open the window for folks who can qualify for those units and benefit from the services that we typically link with them. So thank you. That's, well, No Place Like Home, but you know, the program is encouraging you to integrate with other project target populations. And so we're going to reduce the age for seniors for No Place Like Home to 55. We should actually reduce it overall for all seniors to 55. I'm not quite sure why it was raised, but I think we can argue that our target population, folks with mental illness or homeless, certainly have a high level of vulnerability, and it would be better for us to get out there and house them at an age of 55 versus waiting for that 62 years or older. And again, if we're partnering with other partners, we should bring the overall age down to 55. Thank you very much.
Chief Kayleen Sisk.
This is new to us. You know, we've been here for centuries. Beyond that, we were made homeless by the Shasta Dam that brought a lot of jobs and a lot of homes and a lot of people to the area and brought wealth to the state. We are in that state of distress at this point. The government has decided not to list many of the tribes in California, us being one of them. So the BIA, even though we have certification of Indian blood certified by the BIA, they refuse to assist in any way. So in trying to figure out this housing thing, you know, we're like one paycheck from being homeless. We're one county code from being homeless. And we are working, trying to work with the county and the supervisors to figure out what should we do, because we're not just talking about housing. We're talking about a cultural survival. We need a village. We need zoning for a village. We need codes to build our village so that our culture survives. Not just a neighborhood, not a trailer park, not independent housing funds so that we can go out and build houses all over the county. We need something that keeps the tribe together, keeps us functioning as a tribe, has the ability to have our smokehouse, our roundhouse, our way of life on the village. We're trying to bring the fish back to the river. We need all kinds of things to happen, and we're not really sure about it. We know that our plans include being a green village, that we want to make sure that our future generations are on that track, because we're at a time now, you know, my father was born on the river, and my grandmother was part of the hunt and kill Indian period of time. He went and fought war for this country. We grew up not on the river because it got flooded. We now fight for every chance that we have to hold our ceremonies on the river. But at this point in time, the tribe cannot continue like this with nothing. If we're going to have Winnemem Wintu people and a way of life and a culture to point to in this county, something has to change. And our village structure has to change. We cannot continue to do this. And I know that most people don't care that we dance on the river. They don't care that we go and sing to the water. But that's the water of the state. And we're speaking up for the salmon the best that we can. But our future generations, you know, we're the most undereducated. We have the most suicide of women. We have the most missing and murdered women. We have everything bad happens to American Indian people. And in this community, you know, we're not just talking about elder housing or young people housing. We're talking about everybody together housing. Because in a village, you need your elders with your preschoolers. You need that native connection downline to the history that where we came from and the projections of the future. Our medicine people project what our futures will be, and right now we're at the edge of survival. We may not be. We may just be California Indians in the future. We won't be saying, you know, we won't be doing the dances of the Winnemem Wintu people or singing the songs or speaking the language to the sacred beings here. And so I don't know, you know, I hear a lot of codes and regulations and points and this and that, and I'm thinking, oh boy, how does the tribe fit into all of those codes and permits and livable wages and affordable housing? Because we want to build a village not for affordable housing. We want to build this village for a cultural survival, because as people were talking about incomes, those are way higher than what my people survive on. And they don't, affordable housing is too high for them to afford. And so this village would be something, maybe even has to have special regulations. I don't even know if it could even survive in the process that you're talking about for building houses here. But we deserve it. We were first here. We gave up a lot of land for people to build on, and there's a lot of houses going up around us, big homes coming into the Jones Valley area, while we are stuck. It seems we're stuck, and we're stuck in a position that makes us break the law, break the county codes, because one, we have to have our firehouse. We have to have our prayer house. And while no fires ever have been started by a prayer house fire, we still are in a situation of not being regulated. You know, there's no process for village. There's no coding system for a village in this county. So we can't really apply to meet the regulations. New regulations have to be developed. But I know that over the years, you know, we have been here and doing this, and I just want to say that if we cannot figure this out during my leadership of this tribe, we will probably not be dancing on the river anymore and fighting with the Forest Service to do that, or having our community come up knowing our traditions. And that will be a sad day for me and for my people, that the younger ones, you know, my granddaughter is 2 years old now, she has to wait 15 years to even to go to one of the sacred places on Mount Shasta. Her life is dependent on this village. We cannot continue struggling like we do. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We do have a project that we have been discussing with the county and trying to figure out how do we fund something like this. and it has a fish on there because part of it, Netchai drew that fish and colored it for our project is bringing back the Chinook. In our village site, we would like to have a fish processing place for bringing eggs from New Zealand and restoring the salmon to the McLeod River. So thank you for your time, and thank you guys for doing all that you do for all the people. You know, I always drive down here and I think this is like the place where the homeless people hang out. And I think, boy, I better make some friends down here because we might be trying to figure out how do the homeless people live, because right now we're in a cluster of homelessness, you know, and we take care of each other. But one day that might change. So thank you very much.
Did you leave your contact information?
Did you leave your contact information here? No. So, so Chief, there's been a Native American set aside for housing within the rural designation. We are going to revisit that as well because we have heard other folks that it's just you can't compete, right? You can't compete within the rural set-asides, and then the rural communities can't compete with other bigger rural communities. So, you know, we are really about figuring out how to kind of level the playing field across the state so that it's not just going to one region or a couple of cities. Okay, Robert Lincoln Hancock.
Good morning. My name is Robert Hancock. I go by Bud with Providence International, a nonprofit organization engaged in workforce development and a variety of projects that address the needs of homeless and those that are disenfranchised. So welcome to our beautiful North State, and thank you for coming. I would like to start with a question. Can someone give me the reference point, the basis for the current average affordable housing cost per square foot? There's no average, roughly? Yes. So anybody locally can give that number roughly, what it's currently costing per square foot? Any construction people here? Developers? No? Okay. We got a mathematician in the house. Get out your calculator. My question is this. We're living in rapidly changing times. And with AI, very much prominent, artificial intelligence. And I think there are already existing models out there that may be able to cut that number in half. If that were to be the case, let's assume for a moment that it is, would it be politically possible without being a huge threat to the whole development cobble, if you will, to do that and without adversely affecting the workforce side of things? So I think we're into a very rapidly changing world as it relates to the labor force. And the question is, are we prepared? You spoke of thinking forward 20 to 30 years, which rarely happens in today's municipalities and county. We're all focused on crisis management, how we're going to make the budget, and who are the thought leaders who are actually engaged in thinking about what is our community going to look like 20 years out, 30 years out from this point in time. To me, that's the real definition of leadership. And so I'd like if you could address that maybe as to what is happening, what is projected to potentially happen, and its effect, what plans need to be in place to care for the gaps that would go with it. So To me, that's an important element for our communities, our counties here in the North State especially. And we'd like to see some kind of a provision, some kind of a thought process that could begin to incorporate that in the overall macro plan.
Thank you, Bud. Yes, that's why, again, we are taking this to the road because we need to have a plan. It can't just be business as usual. And I think Jovan will attest to that in a little bit. But for us, where are we going to be, right, in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? We talked about intergenerational. The chief talked about that. And I think people are looking for intergenerational housing, supportive housing, right? As we age, we don't necessarily want to live with our kids, but have our kids near, be able to see our grandkids, have workers perhaps that are taking care of the older generation. So for me, the communities have to change in the way we build housing. But that's why we're out here to also, talk to all of you to see if you all have the same vision. Because it can, that's my vision, is being more holistic, being able to, right, have a drugstore or a clinic, preschool, as well as food and shopping that's close by. So we don't have to get in cars, but it should also be around centers of work where people are working, where we're training, the next generation, where there are opportunities not only for the workforce, but how about those that, are retiring, but they still have time and they still want to come back and still, work as a retired annuitant or volunteer. And we have to kind of keep those communities engaged, because I know when people don't use their brain and they're not socializing, well, their conditions go down very, very quickly. So that is all part of, aging in place and, living till 95 is how do we, engage more people in the community. And so it's not just them or us, and where families are struggling or seniors are struggling, we all need to kind of come together as a community. But maybe Jovan can talk about just how difficult it is, this process. And we specifically are being collaborative, because what happens usually in government is things change and then folks get upset because nobody reached out to them, nobody asked for their input, they don't know who was making those decisions. And so what we're saying here is this is your opportunity to let us know what you would like to see, because we haven't made any decisions yet. But after our 10 tours and written comments, we're going to go back. After we put together a proposal, we're going to ask some experts to provide technical advice for us before we release the proposed changes to the regulations, and then it'll go through the public comment period. But we hope that this is going to be as transparent as possible, that more people versus less are going to give their input, but it is going to be painful, because whenever you make changes, people don't like changes. But during this time of crisis, we all need to make some changes. Maybe we need to suspend some of the rules. Maybe, we can't have every, thing that we want that government officials, would like to see in a building. And, once we get back to our numbers, we can add on those, those requirements. But right now, what is it that we need to move forward to keep those costs low? Because cost is a factor. And we at the Treasurer's Office and at the Governor's Office is trying to cut costs in terms of regulations and fees on our end, so that we can pass those costs down, so that you're not cutting the cost for, the workers. Because the workers, like Travis said, have to make a living, and you want to live the American dream just like everybody else. And it shouldn't be on your back. So,
Yeah, so the word that was just used by the previous speaker was leadership. And I think in a moment of crisis, leadership is even more important than at any other time. And so when you talk about leadership, because we haven't necessarily seen the type of leadership that we all desire, we start using adjectives to describe leadership. We talk about visionary leadership, we talk about thoughtful leadership, we talk about courageous leadership. Well, in fact, leadership should be all those things, so an adjective shouldn't be needed. And so I think when you look at what we're doing, we want to exercise that. We want to exercise thoughtfulness. We want to exercise wisdom we will be transparent. But I think when you think about what we're doing, we're really looking at smart growth. So I think oftentimes there's this tendency and this urgency to do everything sort of big, it's abstract, it's aloof. And so then what people get concerned about is the lack of, the absence of details. How's it going to impact me? How's it going to impact my region? How's it going to impact my household? And so what we're really looking at doing is how do we dual track? So how do we sort of do the necessary things, the minimal amount of things that will give us the greater impact to impact the present, while also sort of creating, if you will call it, maybe a pilot type approach to parallel that, so we can start to incubate and play with models as we build towards the future, right? Because if we try to do all the things that we know we could because maybe we have the intellectual capacity to do it, the reality is we don't have the human capital to do it. We don't have staff capacity to do it. We don't have enough people in TCAC or CDLAC to implement it. We don't have enough labor, right? So training programs would have to evolve to meet the new changes that we're making. And then the development and elected bodies would have to do so. So being cognizant of what the real realities are, even if we make changes on paper, how do we again solve the present need, which is what we're doing here, which we'll plan to do over the next 5 months, but thinking smartly about where are jurisdictions in the state, we've identified a few, who have made it very clear that they want to have changes happen. And what that means is that they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. And so what that looks like is, in some instances, they're moving sites that are publicly owned, in some instances below market. They're committing to an expedited permitting and entitlement process. And so they're doing the necessary things to actually make development happen. So in those spaces, can we carve out sections within cities to say, hey, why not reimagine the future here? Not doing it holistically, but can we put together all the necessary stakeholders? Can we pick a developer? Can we pick the labor partner? Can we pick someone from our staff and work on, in a co-development type fashion, what the future can be? And then start making that the model and then replicate and then allow for industry and market to catch up while we're advancing it. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about doing. Again, we want to be very thoughtful and we want to have input because, again, the unknown is always scary. And we want you to just give us the benefit of the doubt. And I'm glad you heard about it, even if it was at the last minute, but we are trying our best to get the word out. And so if you don't hear something, it's not due to us not wanting to be inclusive. But as we know, we have limitations. And so we're doing our best, whether it's through social media, news channels, print media, to get the word out. But even that is not going to reach everyone. We have people in the senior population. We have other people in the term vulnerable population that are cut off to all the traditional modes of communication that we enjoy. Some of them live on islands that we could never understand. And so unless it's a property manager, someone, a family member going to their door and telling them, they don't have no clue what's going on in the outside world. And so it's going to take each and every one of us to display leadership in our own way to make sure that this word is getting out, to make sure that we're hearing in return the concerns, because we'll never be able to do enough with our current capacity unless each and every one of us take on the role of advancing the conversation. And so with that, I think our job is to sort of advance the future while managing expectations and ensuring that there's not fear in what we're doing. And so if at any point something is not clear, because a lot of times we throw out acronyms, we throw out regulations and all these fancy terms that you mentioned earlier, just tell us to slow down and explain. Because again, if you walk out of here not understanding what we're doing, that doesn't do any of us any good. Because we need everyone to be on the same page and understanding what we're trying to do so we can all get there together. And so with that, we'll go to our next speaker.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Chris Sabatini. I'm Director of Rental Housing for Community Housing Improvement Program. We're based in Chico, but we serve 7 counties, so we really see the broad effect of affordable housing. And I actually have kind of a hodgepodge here of details, but since there's an opportunity to speak, I'm not going to pass that opportunity to share some ideas that might spur things. And a couple of these actually touch in the various areas that you're looking at. I'm glad you're looking at it holistically, because you can't just solve for one and not feel like there's an impact. So here's one. We always go into an application, we're saying, okay, how competitive do we need to be in order to secure this financing? And it's a risk factor because you don't want to just gain the points to get the money to build the project that you cannot continue to operate. So when we think about deep targeting, I really appreciate that we're going to be able to house people that are very low income. But what if, in fact, we are doing so many games with this collective idea here, and we're actually going to eventually better people's lives? What if we went in for an application that we were serving 30% as our major, but really some things change, and so we can't fill those 30%? Can there be a little more margin for not going so deep in order to get points? But if you could do some 40s and 50% and say, but we can still serve a 30% person down here, but we wouldn't hamstring for this big boom of affordability. What if things change? And that's what we want to have happen, but a project's locked into that 30% for 55 years. So we're not housing those 40 and 50% folks, and they can't find housing. So a little conversation about how deep do we have to go in order to get points? If we're doing affordable housing, let's serve a little bit broader. I'd like to echo Debbie's comment on age. If we are going to prepare people for that more traditional 62, 65, can we not go back to that 55? Because a lot of people are struggling. They're not going to be any better for retirement funds at 62. They really need to have a place where they can launch, and many of these people are going to be retiring. Like if they're in the school system, they might be retiring at 55. So why not plan ahead and go back to having a more broad window, which means that we can serve a more broad population. We may end up serving more in their 60s, but at least there's an opportunity for those that may need that senior housing earlier. We experienced the campfire, so we definitely need to be factoring in all the additional folks that actually were on track, but that thing just really devastated them. So we're going to be adding that population back in. So this housing need really is going to need to take into factor those campfire victims. Regarding costs, do I get excited when I see on a pro forma that it's $425,000 to build a unit? I'm not getting excited about that. So I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there's not enough people going back into the construction industry. We need to add more programming skills, opportunities for that trade to have enough people so that there's enough folks out there actually to do this really aggressive 3.5 million housing units. But if we're not encouraging the trades, if we're not giving them an opportunity to learn skilled labor, then we're just hamstringing our ability to build. So I'd like to advocate for that. And with the disasters, that's added another level of we've got to build more and how many people are there. So really encouraging the training programs. HCD layering. I understand this new cap of not having more than 2 HCD layers, but right now I'm looking at a project we're building in Chico, and to make it work, because it's a high cost per unit, I'm having to layer and layer and layer, and I just heard from my consultant, oh, you can't use that funding, which would have been a nice gap filler because you're going to meet your cap on those two. So I'd like maybe to consider, is that really too restrictive? I understand that it's supposed to be streamlining, but at the same time, if we're going to be putting these projects together, hamstringing by saying, no, you cannot use, and it's a small pot of funds, but for me, I need to find these gap financing deals, and if it's valuable to the project to actually meet that goal, we should do that. Here's a lofty one, and I don't know how to design it, but I would really like to see the coordination between HCD, CDLAC, and TCAC on a universal application where you're putting in, at least there's a gut of information everybody needs. If you could fill that out, you're probably applying for multiple funding sources. You only put that major information that everybody needs in once. And then if there are specific things that those little programs need in addition, but I don't need to put in my APN, the address, my phase 1 report 1,000 times If there's special niches, I totally understand that, but one submission for a general, everybody's going to want to know this amount. Now, this is the special stuff that we need. It would just really help, I think, the organization of things. And that means you're putting it in once, it should be accurate, everybody's got that same information, and everybody's got a window into that. There's not variation. And the last thing is, we work primarily in rural communities. We do some urban communities as well. There are disparities between the two, and that really needs to be thought of when you're adding in changes, particularly for TCAC. What does that mean when we're going to change something? How does that affect a rural versus an urban application? Because rural communities already oftentimes are at a disadvantage, and when you make a change, that really can negatively affect the challenges that we're already facing in order to bring that type of housing to a community. So I appreciate the time to speak, and I would encourage anybody to do, it's time to talk. It's time, we've got ears listening. It may not hit the road in the end, but it might spur another idea, and it's valuable to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So Chris brings up a lot of different points. One reason we do not have a director for TCAC and CDLAC right now is because of the comments that I heard over the past 2 years before I got elected to this job, that even though the two agencies sit on the same floor in my office, they weren't working in conjunction. And the only way I could figure out how to get everyone on the table is to vacate those two top spots. We are recruiting right now. We're hoping to hire folks, but whoever we hire has to have the same goals, the same mindset that we are setting forth here at the top. And so Jovan has been basically the acting director for both, trying to figure out what's really going on and how we are going to improve the processes. But yes, HCD, Cal HFA, as well as TCAC and CDLAC, we are all working on one application process. We're also working, and I'm going to personally work on one compliance because that's kind of at the later end, but right now we need to have the one application process. And like I said, if there's backlogs in processes, we are open to working with outside consultants. And the developers said, hey, we will pay versus having these applications sit on someone's desk for 9 months. We will pay to get that, the documents that you all need. And so we are working through some of those processes. Also, the gaps you're talking about. Yes. And so because it's so costly these days to put together a project, there are a lot of gaps. And so we are also internally trying to figure out how to help folks, right? Whether, you have to do sustainable improvements. Well, we have funding for sustainable improvements, right? Healthcare, we have funding for certain healthcare dollars, right? Education. So as projects are out there, we are almost like working with you, like you are like project consultants to say, hey, where is your gap? And let's see if we can help. I'm also engaging the private sector. Wells Fargo Bank has committed $1 billion to affordable housing. I said, please don't just give out grants willy-nilly. Please help us figure out how to meet those gaps in those communities that are ready to go but maybe short a little funding. One idea we're working on is an infrastructure revolving loan fund. There are many jurisdictions that would like to build housing, but for a $30 million sewer plant. And everyone goes, well, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And so why can't we create either internally or with the private sectors to create that fund so that once that $30 million sewer plant goes in and the phases are built, you can pay it back, and that money is going to continue and be available for other communities to build, because we have heard that that is a major problem. And then we also have a brownfield fund that we have been trying to get filled as well. It was a $60 million fund that was used up over 10 years, but again, that has been drawn down. So, we're trying to either fill it or figure out how to creatively set up these funding mechanisms. you want to add anything? Oh, and the fire victims in fire areas.
Yeah, no, I think the treasurer touched on a lot of good points. I agree with you 100%. Now is the time to talk. This won't be the only shot at this, but this is a critical phase at which we're looking to begin to construct a foundation by which we're working towards the future. The other thing I'll just add, because it doesn't always come out in these sort of settings, is we are meeting and talking a lot with leadership at Cal HFA and HCD, and the best way to start building a relationship is to know each other. And that's one of the things oftentimes we don't do enough of in government, right? Things are done via email, things are done via phone call, but no one is actually sitting down, having conversations about what is it that you desire to do as an agency? Where would you like to be a year from now as an agency? Okay, these are the things we're thinking about. This is where we would like to go. Can we work together? You know, you're working on an IT project. What vendor are you using? Okay, can you share that information? I mean, sometimes it's those very small things that sometimes we don't think about because we're so busy that actually starts building the culture that breaks down the silos. And so we're beginning to do that. I've been speaking a lot with Tia Boatman over at Cal HFA, starting to build a strong relationship with Ben Metcalf. Been having conversation with him about things exactly that the treasurer is speaking to. You know, can we build sort of a central portal where information is dumped into that sort of resides kind of somewhere in between all of our agencies where we then can extract information out? Because again, I think the piece that oftentimes I think folks in labor may appreciate, because when it happens development projects, we don't often think about it when we think about what these massive agencies are. Really, it's just a few staff, right? So when you talk about TCAC and CDLAC, when you just hear it in terms of the acronym, it may sound like this behemoth. When you kind of peel back the label, really you're talking about 50 people, right, that are at ground zero of making these things happen. So while we're also looking at the demand in terms of how do we help the market, we really need assistance from you all in speaking to the governor about how do we do things like put funds back in our brownfield remediation account, right? We made a request this year for $60 million. It didn't happen. So we're going to make a run at it again, but also staff request. TCAC and CDLAC does not look like the TCAC and CDLAC that it needs to look like if we're trying to be there by 2025. So what does the 2025 CDLAC and TCAC need to look like if we're building towards that? So those are all the things that we're working with in addition to looking at the marketplace to make everything happen that we all want to make happen.
So you caught my handwriting there. It's Daniel Knott with K2 Development. No worries. Thank you, first off, on behalf of our community for coming up this way. We love this part of the state. We think it's beautiful. We're glad to share it with you. And there's a lot of good affordable housing projects moving along in Redding, Shasta County area, and it's because of your guys' work at the Treasurer's Office and CDLAC and TCAC. So thank you for that. I have a couple thoughts, a couple questions. I figure I could kind of get everybody involved so nobody's getting too bored. I think my first question is just curiosity on timing of the 4% tax credits and when those might roll out. I think there's probably a number of projects in the pipeline, certainly in our pipeline and in our community, that contingent on that timing and that rollout will move forward. So I think I think there's a lot of that pent-up demand on projects that are going to roll out, waiting for that little bit so we can complete the funding stack. And then second on that, obviously that's going to create some pressure with the 4% paired with the state tax credits on the bond allocations, and wondering if there's any projections on that out there on when those bond proceeds might run out and become a competitive process, and what that competitive process might look like. And then for Javon, I loved your passion up here. I share some of it in our community for some of the types of targeted developments that we do. I just wanted to share some maybe visionary things from an affordable housing developer's perspective on how we'd like to be able to continue to build our community up here. The Strategic Growth Council rolled out the Transformative Climate Communities, kind of paired with their ASIC program. I think that's probably part of the vision you share there, and I love to hear that. We love that here in town. We're redeveloping our downtown, and the context sensitivity of the type of development. There's a lot of externalities that come out of there, mostly positive, but some could be negative. And as we develop projects, oftentimes they take the shape of the funding mechanisms, and those funding mechanisms might not be the appropriate context of a city or a rural community, so on and so forth. So wanted to kind of think about, you know, how might those programs maybe develop a better local control. Maybe one just specific example is there's a line in a census tract that says this project's feasible, and you know, across the road it's not, and it should be built across the road, gosh darn it, and you're end up targeting the sites on the other side of the road. So those things are real challenges for us, and I think what they do is the same amount of money could contribute to a better positive externality for the local community, and you know, be less money to build. And I think there's little variances there that would be nice to examine. We like to think that we could build our community for all of our demographics, you know, low income, high income, mid income, and I think that creates for a positive community experience, and to blend the demographics in a specific space. So we're not, I think it fights some of the NIMBYism issues that maybe come along. I don't agree with them in most cases, but it could fight some of those challenges. So I think obviously there's a trend to encourage some of the mixed income on the income averaging side. I think it's an incredible opportunity to build healthy communities. And then the last thing is we're so often challenged by you know, a number of different contingent funding pieces that we're trying to stack together, and all of those run a different cycle. So you got to run the first race before you can start the second race. Each race costs a lot of money, and each race is fully contingent on the next race, so on and so forth. It stacks against the length of a project to get off. It, you know, stacks against return on time, return on investment on a developer's front. It's unneeded project cost, and so, you know, with that in mind, just kind of encourage the right projects to be funded through some threshold basis. You know, maybe that's a local carve out in specific areas allocated through housing authority. I don't know the technicalities on how that could work specifically, but maybe look at that, because I think oftentimes you can look around this room. We have our Cedar Redding Housing Authority, we have the County Housing Authority, we have housing developers, we have community members, we have labor members, and I think we all in this room really understand our community well, and we can do a really good job at providing for the housing needs inside this community. And the more control we have to push those funds out, I think you'll see a lower cost per unit. I think you'll see a better project, and I think you'll see a better community. So those are my thoughts arranged, but I am curious to peek under the hood on the timing topics, if you guys could speak to this. Thank you.
Hi. Regarding the timing of the bond allocation, it looks like we're could be as early as mid-2020. There are other things that are stressing the ability to get the bond allocation completed. As Jovan mentioned, there is a resource constraint as well, which could kind of drive things a little earlier. But we are thinking in terms of allocation dollars as soon as mid-2020.
So we're going to take our last two questions while we look at, then we'll go into next.
Can you answer the competitive process? So what happens when the 4% becomes competitive? When do you think that'll be? Oh, mid-2020. Okay. Does that answer your question?
All right, so we'll go into our last two speakers, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll close it out. So our next speaker is Jeff Morrow. And then after Jeff, we have Allison on deck.
Morning. My name is Jeff Morrow. I am a builder and developer here in Redding and north in Mount Shasta. And first of all, thank you for coming to Redding. I have been working in the field of accessory dwelling units, second units, and have followed the advancement of those regulations, and wanted to mention that HCD in Sacramento has been really good, very communicative, helpful, and I wanted to share that with you. In my learning about accessory dwelling units, I came across SB2, the new $75 per document recording fee set aside specifically for affordable housing. I was wondering how you felt that money would best be worked into our local community. It's about $2.5 million a year. And also how you felt about the community's voice in the dispensation of those funds and how they might move towards accessory dwelling units. Thank you.
So thank you. So you caught me off guard. I try not to be caught off guard, but SB2, I will have to look into that. I'm sure there is some sort of process regarding that money and how they get to communities, so I will take your card and get back to you. But coming back to the other question about communities, we are interested in knowing what you want to do in your community. The more we know what you want to do and the gaps in financing, the better we can maybe reform some of our regs and also talk to HCD and Cal HFA about these are some of the things that communities are trying to do, but for our regulations, they really can't get to that. So if you would just keep in touch with us, we'll give you our business cards. Please write in to us as well, just letting us know what we should know and what you would like to see in terms of the reg changes. And again, if you would like to be on our technical advisory board, you have some time after to review our proposed regs. We would love to have your support.
So we'll go to Allison.
Thank you. I work to house the homeless, and one of the things that before the fire, it was hard to house the homeless here in Shasta County because of the cost of housing. But then after the fire, having been a fire victim myself, trying to find housing was nearly impossible at an affordable level. It's become, trying to find housing now is about applying with 60 other people for one apartment. So it's gotten pretty crazy. But one of the things that my staff have talked about is, we have homeless that are currently living in dilapidated hotels that are closed hotels, but they're living in them. One of the things that would be nice is to convert those dilapidated hotels that make our city look like an eyesore, make those hotels into single living occupancy rooms that could be rented out. And we've talked to a couple of developers, and it's what we're told is it's way too expensive to convert those into something like that. So again, it's that need for getting creative. How do we better the city and make it affordable to, and I've heard this multiple times, making it affordable to build affordable housing. And we need affordable housing desperately in this county, especially since the fire.
Thank you. So just quickly, I'm going to go into next steps in terms of the process for the regs revision. And so just to simplify and to give you a little bit of context, what we're moving into now is what we really kind of just know as the traditional regs revision process that the Treasurer's Office has followed historically. January and then this round represents 2 additional steps we added to the front end of the process to allow for greater public input, to allow for us to collect more insight from around the state into some of the very nuanced things that you don't hear unless you come to the community. And so over the next 5 months, we'll have deliberative conversations. Additionally, you've heard the Treasurer reference a working group. We will be assembling a working group. I don't yet know from a management standpoint if it's going to be one body or if it's going to be kind of clusters of bodies that we can kind of bounce ideas off of over the next couple of months to also be input into what we're putting together. And then we're looking to close it out at our October board meeting for both TCAC and CDLAC, where at TCAC we would have the draft regs voted on by the board. That will then be sort of the final of this initial kind of first round with ongoing efforts to make minor tweaks. And then with CDLAC, we have an additional step with the Office of Administrative Law, where once the board votes on the final draft regs, OAL has to give a final approval. And that can take anywhere from 4 or 5 months. So 2 to 5 months. So best case scenario is we would have that opinion in January, or that decision in January. Worst case scenario is we're looking at May of 2020. Again, our goal is to not do any harm. So we're going to be looking at how do we extend the implementation date either to 2021, or do we need to look at some sort of grandfathering in process, or do we need to look at sort of coupling both? But whatever we do, the goal will be to hold projects harmless. So whatever we come up with, if there still is some blind spot that we had and we're still negatively impacting a project, let us know, because again, the goal is to keep everything moving forward and not disrupt the industry. And so with that, I would just say in terms of my final remarks, I'm extremely appreciative of the dialogue. It makes it much more engaging for us to come to these communities and to hear from you. You have no idea. I think about some of the locations we went to, and I feel like we're talking to ourselves at times. And so to have you all talk to us is extremely important. It's educational for us. No matter how much we bring to these conversations, we all have blind spots. And so you all giving some of the insight and perspective that is relative to your vicinity just extremely helps us. And also, just on behalf of TCAC and CDLAC, they're working their butts off. I appreciate everything I've heard in terms of how great of staff we have. We're going to continue to build on that culture. We want more staff so that we can expedite some of these processes. But also think about one of the things the Treasurer talked about, which is the public-private partnership. And if there are things that we can do that maybe are short-term fixes by contracting or working with private sector partners to help us move along processes, trust me, we will welcome it, and they will be highly appreciative because they're inundated. So those type of things are what we think of as was alluded to earlier, thinking outside of the box. And so we welcome that as well. And so, again, thank you very much. I'm going to turn over now for the Treasurer to give her closing remarks.
Thank you, Jovan. So I just want to recognize a couple of other staff members that we have, team members. Seth Dalton, he is on my outreach team and handles a lot of my rural communities as well as agriculture and cannabis. Sochi Becerra is in my office, so sometimes if you call me, she will be the one that answers the phone. And Mark DeSeo is my communications director, and he sits in the office and writes all these things, but I wanted him to come out today and actually hear about all the things that he's writing. And just a couple of other programs that are in my office. Starting July 1st, we have a new program called Cal Savers. So for any employer who does not offer a pension plan to their employees, you can now open up a plan for your employees with my office that will be professionally managed by my office. These accounts will be portable and will go with the employee from job to job, so it is no longer going to be the responsibility for the employers to manage a plan or track where this funding is going. Cal Able is another program that started this year. If you have a disability diagnosed before 26 years old, you can now open up a Cal Able account and save up to $15,000 a year in that person's name. For so long, anybody with a disability that was receiving some sort of benefits, you didn't put any assets in their name. They couldn't own a house, right? They couldn't own a bank account. And this we felt was, not dignified, and hopefully this will create a little bit of independence for that person and that family. ScholarShare is also another program, ScholarShare 529, where we are encouraging parents and grandparents to save money for the next generation so they don't have to retire with high student loan debt. Governor Newsom, in his budget that he will sign either today or tomorrow, has funding for the second year of free community college. So Governor Brown signed 1 year free community college for any new student going to community college, and now Gavin Newsom is signing, going to fund 2 years of free community college. So I hope you'll take advantage of that program. And then this spring, I sold $150 million in CalVet bonds. So for any veteran who is not dishonorably discharged, we provide very low interest loans. We sometimes provide the full down payment and the processing fees for these type of veteran loans, and the amount of loan is dependent on the ability to pay. So you don't have to have a W-2 job necessarily. You could be a gig worker. You could have some sort of disability payment, but you can still apply and get this kind of loan. And then for young people or people trying to buy their first home, CalHFA does have a first-time home buyer assistance program, also providing down payment assistance as well as closing costs with better financial terms than you would get in the open market. And lastly, we are hosting small business workshops. So if your community, your chamber, your elected officials want us to come and do a free small business workshop, financial literacy, nonprofits, we are open and really just need you to help us find a place, perhaps like this, get speakers, and we will get attendees, and we will provide the speakers to come out and do those workshops. So again, thank you all for coming. Think of us at the Treasurer's Office. We are open for business. We hope you will call us, keep in touch with us, and help us be the solution to this housing problem. So thank you again for your time and coming out today.